name's Sophia. You probably know me from your email inbox. I am the crop stewardship technician at the Land Institute. So I work on all things bringing perennial crops onto the landscape, but I focus a lot of my time on Kernza. And I started as an intern in 2020 and transitioned into a research resident. And as a part of that role, I was focused on sort of a specific research bounded project. And I was really interested in trying to understand how we got to where we are today. How did this network that we are a part of come to be, and what were the different pathways to getting there? So I did a lot of reading old meeting agendas, 2007, surfing through the Land Institute's Dropbox and talking to people like Lee and Wes and Rachel, who were really key drivers of some of the early commercialization efforts at the Land Institute. So the timeline that you see over there is definitely Land Institute oriented. It's not comprehensive, but it is a sort of foundational timeline to build off of, and KernzaCon22 you'll hear about a little bit later, is planning on building on that timeline. And we also have researchers like Aubrey and Omar Tesdell who are really diving into the pre-1980s era. So that's all to say that this is a story of everyone, and I really want it to be an interactive timeline. So you'll see that there's dry erase markers over there, and there's some empty bubbles, so that space for you to talk about future aspirations or plans, and you can even move those bubbles around to 2010 or whatever year that you know a thing happened and you want people to know about it. So just want to encourage you all to take advantage of this in-person time to learn from each other and sort of ideate and think about plans for the future. Relatedly, I was really brought to this project because I wanted to understand how to create more accessible and equitable pathways to Kernza work, and a necessary first step was understanding the existing pathways. So I should have advanced this slide earlier to talk about the empty bubbles, but now you're seeing it in visual form. These are spaces for you to interact. Also, the QR codes lead to further resources if you want to learn more about some specific events that are listed. That leads to the next part of timeline and activities that Amy and I have been working on. And as you see your name tag, you will have 3 different prompts. And the idea with this activity is that we all exist on sort of these different but related aspects of Kernza work, whether you're on the research side, whether you're in processing, baking, you name it, you inhabit a space in this ecosystem. And so you are uniquely fit to understand what spaces can become more accessible and what we need to do as a community to really broaden the types of people and communities who have access to this grain. Because it's such a nascent supply chain, obviously it hasn't been accessible to everyone for a long time because it's a risky endeavor. And we really want to encourage people to think about the ways that this conversation about race and equity and diversity is sort of innervates through all of these different types of knowledge, and not trying to silo it into one specific conversation during the conference, but rather think about it throughout the different talks and how they relate to breeding, how they relate to ecosystem services. And I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly it will look like for y'all to submit the comments. But I'm gonna introduce Amy Teller, who's gonna talk a little bit about, well, I'll let her go ahead.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Teller. I'm a sociologist based at University of Minnesota. I also work closely with the Land Institute, and I'm working on the topic of social sustainability in Kernza. And as Sophia began to introduce, systemic inequities influence farming, processing and end-use industries, consumption, research, education, all nodes in Kernza supply chains and their development and the context that we are all in day to day. And so it's a great opportunity having everyone here together to work on this. And as a shared starting point for this activity, we have a brief overview of ways to think about inequities and equity. And so working toward equity in agriculture begins with recognizing that all groups of people are not starting from the same position. Practices and systems have created and sustained disadvantages and exclusion for some groups, and at the same time, advantages for other groups, and these are inequities. Equity then is the process of identifying how to reduce, correct for, and repair these imbalances and making the changes to do so, with the aim to achieve greater fairness and flourishing for everyone. We're focusing this activity foremost on racial equity. Systemic racism and colonialism have deeply shaped who has access to land, capital, farming, agricultural resources, and the economy overall in the US. But other factors, for example, gender and sexual orientation, nationality, geography, economic and educational background, and others, also shape the context of Kernza and require our attention as well. So we encourage you to think in broad and intersecting ways about inequities and equity in perennial grains. And so the specific activity, these are the prompts that we're asking you to consider. And don't worry, you don't have to remember these. They're written on the green slips of paper that you have. The first prompt is an institution or inequity observed. The second is your work. And the third is a concrete action that the Kernza network can pursue collectively to increase equity. And also, please write that down when and where you get to.
Yes, somebody's down there. Oh, you might have to sign out for me.
Hello, hello, awesome, okay, thanks. So yeah, this is a little rundown of the days. So today, like we said, encourage you to reflect, write, submit your comments. There's a Dropbox next to the timeline and then a little glass bowl over there with a sign on it. So you can drop your comments in, leave them anonymous if you like. And then Amy so kindly is going to do some synthesis and summarize it tomorrow. So we as a community can sort of learn what other people are thinking about. And then there's also a raffle, and that's why there's a number on the back of the prompts. So you can expect some Kernza goodies if you win the raffle. And then the last thing I'll say is that we came up with this activity because, in part, because there was a poll at the CAP all hands meeting back in October. And that poll said that overwhelmingly people said that advancing racial equity in Kernza work should be a priority. And yet less than half could identify very specific things in their work that they could do to advance racial equity. So these prompts were sort of iterated around this idea of, yeah, it's really easy to think about how these are important in an abstract way, but how can we as a community really commit to tangible actions towards advancing equity? And again, I'm really excited that we're in person, and I just keep thinking about like all the meetings that I've had on Zoom where the meeting ends very unceremoniously and I'm microwaving my lunch and I'm just thinking about all the things that I wish I said, or I wish I had a hallway conversation with someone, because so many of those conversations feel pretty high stakes in a Zoom room where you're talking to a bunch of people. So encourage you to talk to one another. And I'm out of time, so thank you. Enjoy the conference.